Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Reed's Gumtree Bookstore, where readers and writers meet in Tupelo, Mississippi, and we're proving it again. We're like the Methodist who was in this conversation, Kent, with a member of another denomination, and he said, "Do you really believe in just sprinkling for infant baptism?" He said, "Believe it, I've seen it." So anyway, you can see, but we're welcoming Kent Krueger to Tupelo. Kent is here for our Tupelo Reads program, our 11th annual edition of the Tupelo Reads. Everybody's on the same page, and we'll be at our library in a couple hours to speak to the community. Normally, on the morning of the Tupelo Reads program, our author goes to Tupelo High School and speaks with all the English students there. They're really excited to have a real author and get to ask those kinds of questions for those aspiring writers in there, as I presume you were at that age too, Ken. And I'm sure that they missed a chance to talk to you, but maybe I can ask you some of those questions that the students would have. But anyway, but one reason this is such a cool pivot is because, in addition to this Tender Land and Ordinary Grace, which made Kent's reputation in the literary world, he has also, for the last 20 years now, written a mystery series, the Cork O'Connor mystery series, of which he's also really well known. And so I thought today, at this part of the day, we talk a little bit more about mystery as well as just writing and that sort of thing. So welcome to Tupelo, Kent. Glad to have you. And Diane, your wife, is with us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be in Tupelo, and it's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Jack. We've had some lovely conversations already. I'm looking forward to this one.
Well, I think I gave Kent a tour. I don't know what you call a conversation. Actually, it was a monologue on me bragging about Tupelo for an hour and a half in the car yesterday. And I told him, I quoted my dad's saying once after a local person had been bragging on Tupelo to an out-of-town group who'd come up to see how we did industrial development. And my dad said, he stood up, he said, "Please don't think less of us just because we think so much of ourselves." And I felt kind
well, you have a lot of reason to be proud here.
That's I guess that was a softball I threw you there. Well, we'll just start it off. Just why does one? How does one decide that he or she would enjoy being a mystery writer? What's the genesis of that interest, that desire?
Well, I've always known I was a storyteller, and I tried for a very long time, as most writers do, to write the great American novel. Kind of a fruitless endeavor. Well, we can get there. And when I was about 40 years old, I went through a midlife crisis and just said, "To hell with trying to write the great American novel. I want to write something somebody might actually want to read." So I looked around me to see what everybody reads. You know what everybody reads? They read mysteries. Yeah. It's a genre whose appeal cuts across all socioeconomic levels. So I decided I'm going to write a mystery. And it worked. Yeah.
Well, did you decide after the first Iron Lake, and we're going to talk just a little bit about this, your first mystery, just as an example of the way you write and think.
Can I see that first?
Yeah.
This is a beautifully loved copy of Iron Lake. Well read.
Absolutely. Thank you. I got you. You see, look, I've even got underlines in there. Underlines, a little highlighting. And I've got, in the back, I've got some questions that while I was reading that I might ask you if we ran out of time. So
well prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was a Boy Scout.
Oh, there you go.
Me too. Boy Scout?
Yeah. Eagle? Yeah. One merit badge shy of Eagle.
Well,
then we moved.
You were right. Yeah. So much of that being an Eagle is if you've got a Scoutmaster and the folks will just push you through. A couple of ladies in our audience here, Lisa and Betsy, have been mothers of Scouts, and a lot of it is the mothers really ought to get a lot of the credit, or the fathers ought to get a lot of the credit.
Here.
Anyway, all right. So you decided you would write something somebody would read, and they did read. Did your second one then? Did you decide that Cork was a fellow traveler that you want to just keep going with? How does one decide to have a series of, because I know a lot of these mystery writers do have a central sense of place and characters. How does that work?
Well, like most writers of long-running series, the first novel I wrote for it, I didn't know it was going to be a series. I just wanted
Right.
to write something that was maybe good enough somebody might actually want to publish it. Um, but when my agent marketed that to the publishing houses, that manuscript to the publishing houses in New York City, a bidding war broke out for the rights to the story. Yeah,
That's
great.
That's what you want to be.
And in the end, I signed a 2-book contract. I had no idea what the next book was going to be, but I knew I had to write contractually obligated. I had to write a second book. So I did Boundary Waters, which is the second book in the series, and enjoyed that immensely. And I was offered a contract for another, so I signed it. So at that point, it's like, okay, this is going forward.
Yeah.
Cork's my guy.
Yeah.
And really, the Cork O'Connor series has been my bread and butter for most of my writing career until I started writing the standalones, Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land.
Well, without giving you too much of a big head, I think that your character development in your mysteries, to me, is upper level of the time one spends on character development rather than just the plots and the chases and those kind of things, which are excellent too. I mean, I don't know if any of them have ever been made into TV or.
But they sure should be.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Any Hollywood producers out there who are watching this,
Absolutely, but they are. I think you're. I don't know. It must be intentional, but how does one decide how much time to spend on making somebody a little more of a complicated person as opposed to just a almost cartoon-esque action hero kind of thing?
Well, when I decided I was going to write a mystery, I decided I was going to write my kind of mystery, and I was going to do everything with my mysteries that I wanted to do with the great American novel. And any good story really isn't about what happens, it's about who it happens to. So I knew I wanted to create characters that the reader would become emotionally involved in. And because, if the reader doesn't care about your characters, then it's just an academic sort of question. What's going to happen? Who cares? But if you have created characters that the readers invest their hearts in, then it's no longer academic. It becomes a very real emotional concern. What's going to happen to these folks? So I always knew that I wanted to write as much a literary mystery as I possibly could.
Well, you've done it.
Well, here's the thing. Mystery readers these days are very perceptive readers. They're intelligent people. And mystery readers really find mystery readers, and all mystery readers are really fine.
Particularly if they buy them in an independent local bookstore.
There you go.
It's really an extra level of intelligence, I think.
And moral responsibility, if you ask me.
Oh, man.
So mystery readers really expect mystery writers to give them everything that we think a literary author would deliver. So when we write mysteries these days, we're expected to create complex, complicated characters involved in complex, complicated relationships, real characters. We're expected to create a profound sense of place. We're expected to use powerful language in the telling of the story. We have to offer the reader dialogue that just sings. In addition to all of that, we have to create a puzzle that's complex enough to keep a reader guessing across the whole course of the story, and at the end, come together in a way that's not only logical, but emotionally satisfying as well. And that's a huge task to set for yourself, which is why I love mystery writing so much, because it kind of hits on all cylinders for me.
Yeah, well, I as I said before, I recognize that, and I recognize that in your writing. One of the things in having these emotional attachments, though, and I don't know if this is a spoiler alert, if somebody hasn't read this book or not, but
those of you who haven't read the book, go like this right now.
But I mean, my gosh, when Molly doesn't make it I'm just like, what? Gosh, and you had done such a sneaky job of right before she is killed, just talked about how happy she is. She's looking out on the landscape. She feels so good about her life, how it's going to go. She and Cork have decided, his marriage is over. He recognizes that finally. She's going to finally find happiness, and then boom. Man, come on, I guess. Well, tell me about that. How does one who creates a character then snuff her out?
Well, that's such a cold way to put it. So here's, when Iron Lake came out, and people came up to talk to me about it, I would usually get two comments. The first was, I really, really like this story. And the second comment was, why the hell did you have to kill Molly?
Well, I'm not an original reader, obviously, but
So here's the story of Molly's death. When I was writing Iron Lake, it's my first mystery, and there are a lot of tropes in mystery writing, and one of the common tropes is that you put the person that your hero or heroine loves in danger, so that in the end, the hero or heroine can save that person and everything turns out right. So as I was writing Iron Lake, I thought, okay, I'm going to put Molly in jeopardy, and Cork will, of course, save her, because that's what you do. I've always written in coffee shops, and
you had a bad cup of coffee. They were out of sweetener.
I have never noticed the quality of the coffee. It just keeps me awake, and it wakes me up in the morning. And I realized I had been going to the coffee shop for several days, intending to write the scene in which Cork saves Molly, and I just wasn't able to do it. And finally, I had to ask myself, is it because Molly doesn't survive? So I went to the coffee shop that morning and determined to write the scene however it played out. And as I was writing the scene, which in the end turned out to be Molly dying on the ice, the waitress who served me my coffee every morning came over. She put her hand on my shoulder and she said, Kent, are you all right? Because tears were streaming down my cheeks. It hurt me to kill Molly. But it was
tearing up now just thinking about it.
Well, it was the right thing to do for the story.
Sweet. Yeah.
And for this reason, Jack, or several reasons actually. First of all, it elevated the story above a beach read, because people who have forgotten so much about the plot of Iron Lake always remember that Molly died. They loved Molly, and Molly died. So it was no longer just a beach read. It also compelled Cork to do what he has to do at the end of the novel to bring justice. And but here's maybe the most important thing that it did for me, and I didn't really realize this until I looked back. If you're a writer of mystery and you want to create suspense, you only get a certain amount of distance when you put your protagonist in jeopardy, because every astute reader knows that this is your protagonist. You're going to pull his ass out of the fire at some point. He's got to be there in the next book.
Yeah, right.
But if you read Iron Lake, you understand that although Cork is safe, anybody else that I put in jeopardy might not make it to the end. And that's where the true suspense comes into play.
That is a wonderful explanation. Thank you so much. To that part B of that question then too, I was, I guess, just kind of pedestrianly thinking that the other reason was because of people were interested in having a family. And obviously this way his wife separated at the time, but in children, that's another part of the world that he would have continued to encompass.
Well, Molly's death certainly
a sense of place and family in their place.
Well, that's a good speculation, and I'm not going to say it's not absolutely correct or incorrect.
Go ahead, you can. My wife is here. I've been told I was wrong before. I'm not saying she was right that I was wrong, but I've been told.
Well, I'm a family man. I've been a long-time family man, and so I always like to see families together.
Right.
And Molly's death certainly opened the door for reconciliation between Cork and his wife. And in fact, that occurs across the arc of the first three books in the story.
Yeah. Well, those. Thank you for that. All right. one of the things that certainly comes through is your sympathy for and compassion for the First Peoples. That's particularly interesting to me and to those of us here because, as I was telling you yesterday, we were driving around Tupelo. The Chickasaw Nation, the height of their civilization was here in Tupelo. There were 5,000 Chickasaw before the Trail of Tears. Their families were here. They're this part of North Mississippi, Northwest Alabama, where the Chickasaws for hundreds of years, and their ancestors thousands of years before that. So we are sensitive to that too. And in fact, in the process of building a heritage center that they are coming back from Oklahoma to build with us. And I hope people who are watching this will stay tuned for that because it's going to be a wonderful thing for Tupelo. It'll be the first time in American history that a tribe that was taken off on the Trail of Tears comes back. And the Chickasaw, they're part of the title of this campaign is the journey home. The Chickasaw is unconquered and unconquerable. And say, yes, you did this to us, but we didn't all die on the trail. We stuck it out. We made it, and now we're coming back. So to give us a sense of yours up in Minneapolis and just in your all the books, not just the Cork, but certainly this Tenderland and Ordinary Grace too. Tell us a little bit about your sense of understanding about our Native Americans.
Sure. In Minnesota, we have two dominant tribal affiliations. In the north, it's the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and in the south, it's the Dakota. Because I set my novels in northern Minnesota, in the Corporal Connor series, I deal significantly with the culture of the Anishinaabe. I decided to incorporate the Ojibwe culture into my stories very early on for this reason. I'm not native to Minnesota, but when my wife and I moved to the Twin Cities, we began doing during the summer, what everybody in the Twin Cities does during the summer. We started vacationing up north, that beautiful north country. We began spending a part of every summer at a YMCA camp, very, very within spitting distance of the Canadian border. And this YMCA camp was literally across the road from an area called the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, 1 million acres that borders Canada of crystal clear lakes and beautiful forests and fast-running clean water.
That's beautiful.
It is, and when I discovered that remarkable territory, I knew when I get serious about my writing, this is what I want to write about. So I knew I was going to set my work up north. And when I took a really good look at the North Country, I realized you can't tell a true story set in northern Minnesota without including the Ojibwe as an element of your story, because their influence up there is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and it's powerful. So I decided, okay, the Ojibwe are going to be a part of what I write about. Now, what did I know about the Ojibwe at that point? About what most white people know about the native cultures we live shoulder to shoulder with. But I was a cultural anthropology major in college, so the idea of learning about this culture, not my own, was really exciting. Yeah. And I began the way all good academics begin. I began by reading. I read everything I could get my hands on. And in the course of my research, I began to meet members of the Ojibwe community and form relationships that have become important friendship across these years. And so I have to admit that my awareness of the Ojibwe culture really began for mercenary reasons. But across all of these years, I have come to a place of great respect, great admiration for the complexity, the richness, the antiquity of the Ojibwe culture and other native cultures in our nation.
Well, that comes through, and certainly, like I said, not just in the Cork O'Connor series, but all your writing. There are a couple of issues, at least a couple of issues that are so prescient in your writing, even 20 years ago. One is the schools, and the other, which I'll talk about in a minute, is the Minnesota Brigade.
A sensitive issue in the South.
Well, not because of the Civil War, but because I was thinking more of January 6th of
Okay.
this year. Yeah, no, I'm past the Civil War.
Okay, good.
You're not you're not at the Vicksburg battlefield here. But
Do you know the history of the Minnesota Brigade at Gettysburg?
I do not.
Okay. The Minnesota Brigade, Volunteer Brigade, held the battle line for the North against Pickett's charge.
Oh, really?
And most of the brigade was killed that day. But they repelled that attack. And essentially that was the turning point of Gettysburg.
Yeah.
So the Minnesota Brigade, people in Minnesota still hold in great respect the men of the Minnesota Volunteer Brigade for that great show of courage on that particular day, in that particular momentous battle.
And rightly so. That's interesting. We're people everywhere look for those heroes of the past to hold on to, and even here in Mississippi, people look at folks, for example, that stood up during the civil rights issue and did the right thing at the right time and those sorts of things too. So that's well. Anyway, I said that's certainly the Indian. Do you find the word Indian in your writing or up there? As I've been involved with the nation, is what we generally how the Encana Foundation is the local foundation that's helping build this thing. Most often we seem to refer to them to the nation. Is there what's the, I know you use First Peoples a lot. Is there a nomenclature that's considered better usage that they respect more?
It depends on who you talk to. And
Okay.
I think the folks in the Native community are not of one voice in what they prefer to be called. But if you know that someone is in fact Anishinaabe, you use that, or if you know the Dakota or Lakota. But when I'm talking with my Native friends these days, I call them Native.
Right.
We talk about one another to one another, and they call themselves Native. Yeah. So that's seems a very politically correct way.
Well, I want to be respectful of that.
Absolutely.
And sports are so huge in the South. The Atlanta Braves, who just won the World Series, there hasn't been any backlash on the word Braves. And of course, now they're World Series champions. Washington Redskins football team is no longer the Redskins. They're just the Washington football team. They'll come up with something else. So sports recognizes those nomenclatures too. Well,
aren't they going to be called the Washington Swamp Dwellers?
Well, they need until they get a better quarterback, the offensive line. I guess they will be. Church, Tupelo is a religious community, at least claims to be. Somebody said there are more churches here than Christians. I don't believe that. But anyway, but religion through less so maybe through the court series, although I haven't read all of them, but certainly in your other novels. In fact, Cork is how you would describe him, and maybe he evolves back and forth too. But you've got the priest in Iron Lake that's part of the story too. Talk a little bit about I think a lot of writers these days either intentionally or just don't think about it, don't really have much of a religious piece of their writing, but you do. Talk about that a little bit. What's important about that, or is it just something that's it's a natural part of your life? It's something that you're familiar with and deal with.
Well, yeah, the spiritual journey has been an important thing for me my whole life. Yeah. We're all on a spiritual journey, whether you embrace that or not. Yeah. That's what I believe at any rate. And so I often talk about that in my work. And it's something that comes very naturally for Corporal Connor because he's a man of mixed heritage. He's Irish American and he's Ojibwe. So he has a foot in two different spiritual traditions: his white Catholicism, his Irish Catholic, and his Ojibwe spirituality. So very often in those stories, he's trying to figure out where his unique spiritual path lies. And that's certainly been an issue for me. I think it's probably an issue for most of us as we struggle through life, trying to understand why we're here and what's the purpose of our lives and all of that. How do we connect with the larger spirit of the universe, all of that. So, yeah, I have no problem at all. You know, it's very unusual for a mystery series to really begin to ask the difficult spiritual questions. But why not?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, somebody needs to. Why not you?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've discovered, Jack, is, you know, I can talk about things that are important to me, social issues, spiritual issues. And as long as I couch these questions I pose in the context of a really good, compelling mystery, even people who, you know, don't give a hoot about the spiritual journey or maybe believe things socially different from what I believe will still read me. Yeah. That doesn't mean that they agree with me, but maybe I've got them thinking a little bit more about the issue then.
Yeah. Our friend of our bookstore, John Grisham, doesn't shy away from putting his, the Innocence Project, one of the things, innocent people, trying to get them out of prison, things like that. I mean, he's not afraid, and I think the older he's gotten, the less, not that he was ever afraid, but more often you see a little more. This Sully, which was his last book about this basketball player, talked about the refugee situation in Africa as part of that story. And just, had one of the characters was an immigration lawyer in North Carolina that helped assimilate some of these immigrants. I know, if you don't mind me mentioning something in his personal life, your wife Diane has been working with immigrant family from Afghanistan recently to do that same kind of thing. So I think that's interesting. Again, I think you've succeeded in making your mysteries more than just a whodunit, and I applaud that. And I think people around here will be interested in that too. I think the journey part of it, as far as the plot itself goes, one of the things the students always ask, so I'm going to ask these two. They always ask, what are your writing habits? What should I do? Well, a student will always ask, what should I do if I want to be a writer? How should, very practically, should I do that? And the other one is, do you have your plot all wrapped up before you start? So I'll take those questions in order if you want to.
Okay. If you want to be a writer, what should you do?
If you're listening right now, get your notepad or your phone out, I guess, if you're a young writer.
I have two valuable pieces of advice to offer those of you out there who hope to be writers. The first is this: write every day, 7 days a week. I don't care if you're working. I don't care if you're overwhelmed with studies. I don't care what seems to be eating up all of your time. You can certainly carve out half an hour, 45 minutes in every day to bend to the work. And what that does is that it keeps you connected with the energy of a project, but it also sends a message to everyone around you that this is important to you. And maybe even more important, it confirms in your own mind the importance of being a writer, the importance of the writing in your own life. So that's my first piece of advice: write every day. And the second piece of advice is this: marry somebody with a good job. In terms of
should you wait until you're after age 18 to do that, Ken? Ideally, if you're a high school sophomore and listening to this, don't get married until you're 18 at least.
Yeah, listen to this guy. And in terms of how I write my stories, do I know the ending before I begin? It depends on the kind of story I'm writing, Jack. If I'm writing a mystery in my Corporal Connor series, those are all essentially mysteries. And a mystery is a very tightly woven fabric of storytelling. Everything depends so significantly on everything else in a mystery. And I think the success of a mystery depends largely on the timing of the reveals. When do you give the reader the clues that are going to be necessary for solving the mystery at the heart of the story? So when I write a story in my Coco Connor series, I think that story through as completely as I can before I ever put my fingers to the keyboard. At the end of that thinking process, I know how the story begins. I know how it ends. I know who did what to whom and why. I know the themes I want to weave through the story. But when I'm writing a standalone like Ordinary Grace or This Tender Land, for those stories come from a different place, um, and I have sought a different creative process for those books. I want those stories because they come from a deep place in my heart. I want them to feel more organic to the reader. So when I have written both of those books, I generally speaking have had no idea where I'm going to go with the story or how it's going to end. In each of those books, I knew a few essential elements of the story I was going to tell, and I let those guide me then as I was creating the story. But pretty much, I allowed the story to reveal itself to me as I was writing the manuscript, and those were two of the most extraordinary experiences I ever had as a writer. I'm not sure I would ever write a Cork O'Connor story that way, because so often, I mean, plot is so important in the mystery, and I'm afraid I would wake up in the middle of the night, having written myself up into a dark alley, going, "Oh, what the hell am I doing? What do I do next?" And I hate that. I hate that. Yeah.
Well, you could pull out a little of the mysticism. You know, you've got the you pronounce it Wendigo. You know, the coffee pot rattles off the stove. I mean, you could have some sort of supernatural show up to help get Cork out of the corner, I guess.
Well, I often have an element of, you could call it the supernatural. One of the things
that's handy for you.
Well, one of the things that I love about and have really embraced in terms of the culture of the Ojibwe and many Native people is they see the world in a very different way than those of us with European ancestry do, and they're more than willing to open their understanding to all of the things that occur in existence that you and I either ignore or are not aware of. And I just love that. I mean, in This Tender Land, Odie, when he's beginning to tell the story, he says, I think we should open ourselves to every possibility because there's nothing our hearts can imagine that is not so. And that's what I believe.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I wonder how hard or difficult it is, or easy it is, to identify the bad guys in your story or the bad influences or that sort of thing. You think, well, I've got a hero, I want him in his own bumps and bruises way to get through, but how significant a challenge is it to pick out who the other side of the protagonist is? Or maybe that's easy. Maybe it's easy to find bad guys out there.
Well, the bad guys are not always the whodunits.
Right.
In fact, oftentimes the bad guys work very nicely as red herrings.
Yeah.
You want to be the person you don't like to be responsible, but you know, if it was always that way, you could pick that person out.
Yeah.
So remember when you, I don't know, I grew up on Perry Mason, and I always knew who did it in Perry Mason because it was the person least likely to have done it. And then Mason would get up and he would explain the logic that led to it. You know, it's like, oh God, give me a break. So yeah, I use who the reader expects to be the culprit. Often it's a red herring.
Do you have these annual contracts? I understand are kind of a very practical pull to get you back at the table, but does in your imagination of plots, you just kind of think of something maybe in the night, write it down, and that might come up in a book, 3 books from there, or do you just got to work on them one at a time and that way? How does somebody have that many different good ideas for plot?
Well, you know, I think here's how I explain that. I think when you accept that you're one of the storytellers. It's like you open a door to yourself, and stories start coming at you from all directions. I mean, they come from places you would expect. Family stories, newspaper stories, they come from places you would never expect. And for me, it's never been a question of what do I write now? It's been a question of all the stories I could tell, what's the one that speaks to me right now? And sometimes it's a question of what's the one that contractually I can write about within a year, you know?
How long does it take you to finish a novel and get it edited and published to have an annually?
It's probably a full year, that whole process. About 8 months of it is the writing process, and the rest of it is editorial.
You have the same editor for a long time, or you switch back and forth?
Well, I'm really fortunate now. I have a team that I consider the best editors in New York City. I really do. But that wasn't always that case. For my first 3 Cork O'Connor novels, I had 5 different editors. I kept driving them out of the editorial business. Then I got an editor who was on the rise in the publishing house, and as her star rose, so did mine. And I was with her for 15 years.
Wow.
And then she left because she had a young child and she wanted to be able to spend more time with her daughter. And I got assigned the editor I have now, who is the executive editor and vice president of the imprint that I write for. And boy, is it great. Yeah. But many writers go through many editors. That's not an unusual story at all. And you are really fortunate when you find an editor who's willing to edit, who really knows how to edit, because so often that's not the case.
This is a paraphrase, as you probably know the exact quote, but Hemingway said something like, "There's no great writing, there's just great editing and rewriting," or something.
Well, Hemingway said you never finish a novel, you simply abandon it. Yeah.
Well, what we're looking for, like I said, I don't want to take any more time in this interview from the Tender Land. I hope that that will also be archived and Facebook Live at noon today. But anything else other than this Tender Land stories that you'd like to share with folks that are listening to this today, just about your life as a person, a writer, a friend? We're certainly glad to have you in Tupelo. You've traveled, I guess, all over the country now doing events like this, or just I know you're fortunate to have such a wonderful wife. I got to know Diane yesterday. Anything else just on your life, what do you see coming up in the next 5 years or so? We're about the same age.
How come you look so much younger than me?
I don't think that's true, but I think I guess we're in at least Indian summer, if not the autumn. What do you see? What do you see going forward? What do you hope Kent Krueger's life looks like going forward?
I am in a very wonderful place in my life as a writer, in my life as a husband, and my life as a father and grandfather. So I would like none of that to change. But who knows? You know, the coronavirus has really changed so many things in the world. I don't travel the way I used to. Before the coronavirus made a shelter in place, I spent a significant part of every year traveling, doing events like this, or conferences, or festivals. And when the coronavirus put that to an end, one of the things I discovered is I really like sitting at home writing. So I probably would do less of this going forward, because
I'm glad we got you before you decided not to come this far south.
Yeah. For those of you who are watching, this is the 3rd scheduled time we have attempted to bring me down to Tupelo. So it's good to finally be here. Let's see, I have finished the next book in my Cork O'Connor series, number 19, a book called Fox Creek, that will be out in August. During the I feel a little guilty about this, but during the pandemic, I found it to be one of the most productive periods for me as a writer, probably because that's all I could do was write. So I wrote 2 novellas, and there's really no platform publishing platform for novellas
Yeah.
anymore. So my agent said, I really like these, but we can't do anything with them. Could you give us another novella? So I just finished another novella. So I think we're going to offer that to my publisher.
Excuse me. So does that mean he launched 3 novellas in one book?
In one book.
Yeah.
As Stephen King often does, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I have to be honest, I think some of his shorter works are some of his best.
Mm-hmm.
I love his novellas. Stephen, if you're watching, I'm not all that thrilled sometimes with your longer pieces, but I love your novellas. And I am at work on what may be the next standalone novel.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing this time with us, and look forward to hearing you at the library. Thanks for coming to Reads.
It's a pleasure, Chad.
And hopefully you tell your friends about this. This will be archived on our Reads bookstore, Reads website, and YouTube. And the Lee County Library will also have today's Facebook Live.
And downstream on there,
And
the Lee County Library.
downstream on Lee County Library, and then we can probably get that after the library does it and archive it here too. So thanks. Hope to see everybody at the library at noon. And Kent, Diane, thanks again for coming.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
So long, everyone.